This is GIRU, and this will be an in-depth video about feints in Chivalry medieval warfare. It's a common issue in public duelyards for people to complain about feints and shun feinters, especially among the newer players. I aim with this video to clear up any negative attitudes towards the feinting aspect of Chivalry, as well as give a detailed explanation and examples on how to properly play with feints. I actually clocked about 2,000 hours on Chivalry, just playing public last team standing servers, in which feints were entirely avoided and players were even vote kicked for this unchivalrous behaviour. When I did my first clan trial for MYR, I was pretty much playing for the first time with unrestricted feints, and while I did well against some players, I found myself completely destroyed by the experienced veterans. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that by avoiding feints, all that means is that when you do run into a good player who can play with feints, you will just find yourself completely outmatched. It's best to start learning early. Feinting is a balance between all weapons, otherwise the skill to the game would just be about breaking animations and stamina wars. While performing a feint is obviously extremely straightforward, being able to survive in a fight against a good player with feints is not. Many lesser players attempt to deal with feints by gambling. This is where you attack regardless of not having the initiative to, and while this can bring you some small success, it will limit your ability to be a good player. Predicting player patterns is not a good way to be consistently good. Feints cost stamina. If you gamble incorrectly, then the feinter has lost absolutely nothing and gets a free hit. Just because you fell for a feint doesn't mean that the subsequent attack is going to land. Dealing with what comes after the feint is just as important as reading feints, and that is also equally as important as avoiding being feinted in the first place. For example, Frank avoids having to read the Sword of War stab feint by running away. He turns around to parry when he hears the grunt sound of the attack. This is an example of number 3, where he avoids being feinted in the first place. Even if King performed a real attack, Frank would have still dodged it. This wins him the duel through stamina. This is a much better alternative than just simply gambling, which could have ended wrong. Playing Vanguard is the best example of number 3. You can avoid dealing with attacks or feints by keeping distance and running back. You can also prevent the enemy player from gaining initiative through aggression and the fact that you have longer reach. Going to number 2, the basic feint read. Most feints can be read in Chivalry with proper discipline. It takes significant practice, but you'll become a much better player with the skill to read rather than to guess if the enemy feints. This is generally what separates the good from the bad, but you don't have to be able to read to be a good player, especially in team objective. While number 2 can't be applied to some things, such as a stab feint from a sword, it's still easily possible to dodge or double parry the weapon, which is a much better outcome than just guessing. As long as you don't spend all your dueling time trying to gamble other players, you will naturally pick up how to read. By disciplining yourself to block at the last second, players' feinting patterns can become much clearer than when you are just gambling. It's important to stay calm while playing. Chivalry can be an extreme psychological battle at times, and so a level head is needed to read feints. Confidence is also important. It's impossible to win if you think that you've already lost. Dealing with what comes after the feint is the most critical part to feint fights. You have the option to go for a dodge or a double parry. A double parry is when you fall for the feint, but you still manage to block the subsequent attack, and the dodge is pretty straightforward. It's best to mix up dodges and double parries. If you keep doing the same thing, the enemy will catch onto it and adjust his aim. Double parrying involves blocking earlier versus a feint which you won't be able to read, such as a face hug stab feint, then attempting to throw off your opponent's aim with movement and matrices. Everybody performs this differently, and so it's best to try this yourself and see what you're comfortable with. The most common method of double parrying involves crouching and leaning back. If you find yourself against someone who parries so early you can't hit them after a feint, drags are the solution. Double parries are safer to attempt than dodges, but a dodge usually forces your opponent to combo feint to parry, which will massively drain his stamina and can potentially win you the fight. A good dodge movement is dependent on the weapon and the attack used. On the other hand, a double parry is pretty universal. However, Vanguards and Man-at-Arms also have an easier time dodging than Knights due to their increased foot speed and can usually just evade by jumping away. Some other things that I'd like to cover. One of them is the fact that it's very important to keep pressuring your opponent if they are spending all their stamina feinting you. Allowing them to regen is pretty much always a bad idea unless it's in team objective. You can apply this pressure through kicks and by baiting attacks and then running away while you close in, but it's important to continually pursue them if they expend their stamina, even if you have no health. It also helps to start backpedaling if you think that they're about to attack you and you are worried that it may be a feint. but don't let this stop you from stopping them regenning. Kicks are extremely useful in these kind of situations. Ignoring the cliche, it's actually very true in Chivalry that a good defense is also a good offense. You don't have to read any feints if you can kill your opponent in a single combo. While I advise reading feints and not gambling, it is important to punish feints with either kicks or attacks, and versus good players, you can feint into their feint in order to make them parry. The final thing to cover is the fact that a man-at-arms can dodge out of parry, dupe, meaning that if you want to main man-at-arms you don't ever have to worry about reading feints. Thanks for watching the video. If there's enough demand, I'll make another video about some other aspects of Chivalry.